December 17th, 1944. The snow-covered forests of the Ardennes lay silent under a grey winter sky, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery and the crunch of boots on frozen ground. American soldiers huddled in foxholes and behind makeshift barricades, their breath forming clouds in the bitter cold as they watched the tree line for signs of German movement. The Battle of the Bulge had erupted with devastating surprise just 24 hours earlier, shattering Allied confidence and sending shockwaves through command posts from the front lines to Paris. But something else was moving through these forests, something more insidious than artillery shells or tank attacks. Rumors were spreading through American ranks like wildfire. German spies, dressed as GIs, were operating behind Allied lines, speaking perfect English, carrying American identification, and sowing confusion wherever they appeared. Staff Sergeant Mike Patterson stood at a checkpoint on a narrow road leading toward Malmedy, his M1 Garand rifle held at the ready as he scrutinized every vehicle that approached his position. The military police armband on his sleeve marked him as one of the thousands of MPs who had been hastily repositioned to screen traffic and identify potential infiltrators who might be moving through Allied territory in captured uniforms. The intelligence briefings had been alarming in their vagueness. Enemy agents were operating behind American lines, but no one knew how many, where they were, or what their specific objectives might be. Every jeep, every truck, every group of soldiers moving through the checkpoint represented a potential threat that could turn deadly without warning. The psychological impact of the infiltration reports was already visible in the behavior of American troops, who had begun questioning each other with suspicious intensity, demanding passwords, checking identification papers, and treating every unfamiliar face as a potential enemy agent. The careful coordination and mutual trust that had characterized Allied operations throughout the European campaign was being eroded by uncertainty and paranoia that made every interaction potentially dangerous. Officers who had worked together for months found themselves subjected to detailed questioning by military police who had orders to verify the identity of anyone whose behavior seemed suspicious or whose knowledge of American culture appeared incomplete. The very fabric of military discipline and camaraderie was being tested by an enemy that fought with deception rather than direct force. The strategic implications of the infiltration threat extended far beyond immediate tactical concerns to encompass fundamental questions about military security, intelligence operations, and the psychological warfare that was becoming an increasingly important component of modern combat. German commanders had apparently recognized that conventional military force alone would be insufficient to achieve their objectives in the Ardennes offensive, leading them to supplement traditional attacks with unconventional operations designed to create confusion and uncertainty behind Allied lines. The infiltrators represented a new category of warfare that challenged established procedures for distinguishing friend from foe, while creating opportunities for enemy agents to gather intelligence, conduct sabotage, and undermine Allied command and control systems through systematic deception. But what happens when the infiltrators are caught, and the disguise itself becomes their death sentence? The strategic situation that prompted Operation Greif reflected Adolf Hitler's desperate recognition that Germany's military position was becoming untenable without dramatic action that could fundamentally alter the trajectory of the European war before Allied industrial superiority and Soviet numerical advantages could guarantee Axis defeat. The Ardennes offensive represented Hitler's last major gamble in the West, designed to split Allied armies, recapture the vital port of Antwerp, and potentially force a negotiated settlement that would allow Germany to concentrate its remaining resources against the Soviet advance in the east. The conventional military components of the offensive involved massive concentrations of armor and artillery that had been assembled through enormous sacrifices in other sectors. But Hitler and his commanders recognized that surprise and confusion would be essential elements for achieving breakthrough against Allied forces that possessed overwhelming advantages in air power and logistic support. SS Oberfuhrer Otto Skorzeny had earned his reputation as Germany's most skilled special operations commander through audacious missions that included the rescue of Mussolini from Italian captivity and various sabotage operations behind enemy lines throughout the European conflict. His selection to command Operation Greif reflected both his proven capabilities in unconventional warfare and Hitler's confidence that innovative tactics might achieve results that conventional military operations could no longer deliver. Skorzeny's approach to special operations emphasized careful preparation, detailed intelligence, and systematic exploitation of enemy weaknesses through methods that conventional military doctrine did not address. The infiltration mission represented the culmination of German special operations development that had been refined through years of combat experience across multiple theaters. The operational planning for Operation Greif involved systematic analysis of American military procedures, uniform specifications, vehicle markings, and cultural characteristics that would enable German personnel to pass convincing inspection by Allied security forces operating under combat conditions. German intelligence services had compiled detailed information about American military organization, including rank structures, unit designations, equipment specifications, and operational procedures that would be essential for successful impersonation of American military personnel. The linguistic preparation alone required months of intensive training for German personnel who needed to master not only American English, but also military terminology, slang expressions, and cultural references that would enable them to respond appropriately to casual conversation or formal questioning by suspicious Allied personnel. The recruitment and training of personnel for Operation Greif required identification of German soldiers who possessed the necessary language skills, physical characteristics, and psychological qualities for successful impersonation of American military personnel under the extreme stress of combat operations behind enemy lines. The selection process emphasized individuals with pre-war experience in English-speaking countries, including emigrants who had returned to Germany before the war, and personnel with educational backgrounds that included extensive English language study. The training program involved intensive instruction in American military procedures, cultural characteristics, and current events that would enable infiltrators to respond convincingly to the types of questions they might encounter during security screenings or casual interactions with American personnel. The logistics of equipping Operation Greif infiltrators required systematic acquisition of American uniforms, weapons, vehicles, and identification documents that would withstand detailed inspection by Allied security personnel who were trained to detect German deception operations. The collection of authentic American equipment involved battlefield recovery operations, prisoner exchanges, and intelligence networks that had been systematically gathering American military materials throughout the European campaign. The modification and reproduction of American vehicles, uniforms, and equipment required specialized facilities and technical expertise that demonstrated the systematic approach German forces were willing to employ for achieving strategic deception objectives. The strategic deception component of Operation Greif extended beyond simple infiltration to encompass psychological warfare operations designed to create confusion, uncertainty, and paranoia throughout Allied command structures that might amplify the tactical impact of the actual infiltrators through systemic disruption of Allied decision-making processes. German planners understood that successful infiltration operations could achieve effects that exceeded their immediate tactical capabilities by creating psychological pressure that would force Allied commanders to divert resources to security measures while undermining the trust and coordination that were essential for effective military operations. The systematic approach to psychological warfare reflected German recognition that modern military conflicts involved not only physical destruction, but also mental and emotional factors that could influence the outcome of campaigns. The intelligence preparation that supported Operation Greif involved comprehensive analysis of Allied security procedures, checkpoint operations, and counterintelligence capabilities that would determine the types of deception methods most likely to succeed against American military police and security personnel. German intelligence services had systematically studied American military organization and procedures through prisoner interrogations, captured documents, and observation of Allied operations to identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited through infiltration and deception. The detailed understanding of American military culture and procedures that emerged from this intelligence preparation provided the foundation for training programs that would enable German personnel to operate convincingly behind Allied lines. The timing of Operation Greif was carefully coordinated with the broader Ardennes offensive to maximize the psychological and tactical impact of infiltration operations during the critical initial phases of the German attack, when Allied forces would be most vulnerable to confusion and disruption. The infiltrators were scheduled to begin their missions during the pre-assault period, creating uncertainty and paranoia that would complicate Allied response to the main German offensive while simultaneously conducting sabotage operations that would disrupt Allied communications and logistics capabilities. The systematic coordination between conventional and unconventional operations demonstrated German understanding of modern warfare as a comprehensive system that required integration of multiple capabilities to achieve strategic objectives. The legal and ethical implications of Operation Greif reflected broader questions about the boundaries of acceptable warfare that had become increasingly complex as military technology and tactics evolved beyond traditional concepts of honorable combat between uniformed opponents. The use of enemy uniforms and insignia for deception purposes violated established international law governing warfare between civilized nations, while creating precedents that might justify similar violations by enemy forces operating against German targets. German commanders understood that infiltration operations using enemy uniforms would subject their personnel to execution as spies if captured, but they were willing to accept these risks in pursuit of strategic advantages that might influence the outcome of the war. The command and control structure for Operation Greif reflected the high priority that German leadership placed on unconventional operations as essential components of their strategy for achieving favorable outcomes, despite overwhelming Allied advantages in conventional military capabilities. Skorzeny reported directly to Hitler and the highest levels of German command, ensuring that infiltration operations would receive necessary resources and support while maintaining operational security that would prevent Allied intelligence from discovering German plans before they could be implemented. The systematic approach to Special Operations Command demonstrated German recognition that unconventional warfare required different organizational structures and decision-making processes than conventional military operations, while highlighting the strategic importance that German leadership placed on achieving surprise and confusion through innovative tactical methods. The first infiltrator was captured at 0347 hours on December 18th, when Military Police Sergeant Robert Chen noticed discrepancies in the uniform and equipment of a soldier attempting to pass through a checkpoint near Malmedy. The individual claimed to be Corporal James Morrison from the 82nd Airborne Division, but his paratrooper boots showed no signs of the wear patterns typical of airborne operations, while his knowledge of divisional organization seemed superficial when subjected to detailed questioning. Chen's suspicions were aroused by subtle differences in pronunciation and an excessive formality in speech patterns that seemed inconsistent with typical American military communication styles. The systematic questioning that followed revealed gaps in knowledge about American popular culture, military slang, and current events that gradually exposed the deception despite the infiltrators' extensive preparation and language training. The interrogation that followed the initial detention was conducted by Captain William Hayes, an intelligence officer who had been hastily briefed on Operation Greif after initial reports of German infiltrators began reaching Allied headquarters through various channels. The German soldier, who eventually identified himself as Unteroffizier Klaus Weber of the 1st SS Panzer Division, initially attempted to maintain his cover story despite mounting evidence that his deception had been exposed. The psychological pressure of interrogation under combat conditions, combined with the knowledge that capture while wearing enemy uniforms would likely result in execution, gradually broke down Weber's resistance and led to a comprehensive confession that provided Allied intelligence with their first detailed understanding of Skorzeny's infiltration plan. Weber's confession revealed the scope and objectives of Operation Greif in detail that exceeded Allied intelligence estimates, including information about the number of infiltrators involved, their specific missions, and the support structure that had been established to enable their operations behind Allied lines. The systematic nature of the German plan became apparent as Weber described training facilities, equipment procurement procedures, and operational objectives that demonstrated the comprehensive approach German forces had taken to strategic deception. The intelligence value of this confession was enormous, providing Allied commanders with the information necessary to develop effective countermeasures while simultaneously undermining the operational security that was essential for the success of German infiltration operations. The second major capture occurred later that morning when a patrol from the 99th Infantry Division detained 3 individuals driving a captured American Jeep whose vehicle markings did not correspond to any legitimate Allied unit operating in the area. Staff Sergeant Mike Patterson, the MP who had been manning the checkpoint, immediately noticed that the prisoners' weapons were German-manufactured items that had been modified to resemble American equipment, while their uniforms showed subtle differences in fabric and construction that indicated enemy manufacture. The systematic examination of their equipment revealed additional evidence of German origin, including ammunition, rations, and personal items that contradicted their claims to be members of the 1st Infantry Division conducting reconnaissance operations. The interrogation of these 3 infiltrators provided additional details about Operation Greif, while confirming the accuracy of Weber's earlier confession and establishing patterns of deception that would enable Allied forces to identify other German agents operating behind their lines. The prisoners revealed specific objectives, including the capture of key bridges, disruption of communications facilities, and assassination attempts against high-ranking Allied commanders that demonstrated the strategic ambitions underlying Skorzeny's plan. The systematic coordination between multiple infiltration teams became apparent as the prisoners described rendezvous points, communication procedures, and support networks that had been established to enable sustained operations behind Allied lines. The psychological impact on the German infiltrators of rapid exposure and capture was evident in their behavior during interrogation, as individuals who had undergone months of preparation for these missions found their carefully constructed cover stories collapsing under systematic questioning by Allied intelligence personnel. The stress of operating behind enemy lines while wearing uniforms that would guarantee execution if discovered had created psychological pressure that many infiltrators were unprepared to handle when confronted with evidence that their deception had been exposed. The systematic breakdown of operational security through individual confessions created a cascade effect that compromised the entire infiltration network and provided Allied forces with comprehensive intelligence about German special operations capabilities. The legal proceedings that followed the capture of German infiltrators operated under international law, governing the treatment of spies and saboteurs operating in enemy uniforms during wartime conditions. Military courts convened under field conditions determined that the German personnel had violated the laws of war by conducting military operations while wearing enemy uniforms and insignia, subjecting them to execution as unlawful combatants rather than treatment as prisoners of war entitled to protection under Geneva Convention provisions. The systematic application of military justice under combat conditions demonstrated Allied commitment to maintaining legal standards while addressing the security threat posed by German infiltration operations. The executions that followed these military trials were conducted according to established military procedures for dealing with spies and saboteurs, serving both as punishment for violations of international law and as deterrent to other German personnel who might be considering similar operations. The systematic documentation of these proceedings provided evidence of Allied adherence to legal procedures while sending clear messages to German command about the consequences of infiltration operations that violated established military conventions. The psychological impact of these executions on remaining German infiltrators was significant, as word of captured agents' fate spread through intelligence networks and undermined the morale and effectiveness of agents still operating behind Allied lines. The intelligence exploitation of captured German equipment, documents, and personnel provided Allied forces with detailed understanding of German special operations capabilities, training methods, and operational procedures that would influence counterintelligence operations throughout the remainder of the European campaign. The systematic analysis of German infiltration techniques revealed vulnerabilities in Allied security procedures while providing information necessary for developing improved countermeasures against future deception operations. The coordination between tactical capture operations and strategic intelligence analysis demonstrated Allied capacity for systematic exploitation of intelligence opportunities under combat conditions. The radio communications that were intercepted between German infiltrators and their headquarters provided additional intelligence about Operation Greif, while enabling Allied forces to track the location and activities of remaining agents operating behind their lines. The systematic monitoring of German communications revealed the command structure, operational procedures, and objectives that governed infiltration operations, while providing opportunities for Allied forces to anticipate and counter German special operations activities. The intelligence value of these intercepts exceeded their immediate tactical importance by providing insights into German special operations doctrine and capabilities that would influence Allied planning for subsequent operations. The collapse of operational security that resulted from systematic capture and interrogation of German infiltrators created a cascade effect that compromised the entire Operation Greif network within hours of the first major capture. The interconnected nature of the infiltration plan meant that information obtained from individual prisoners could be used to identify and locate other agents operating in different sectors, while the systematic exploitation of captured equipment and documents provided additional intelligence that enabled comprehensive countermeasures. The rapid degradation of German infiltration capabilities demonstrated both the vulnerability of complex deception operations to systematic counterintelligence efforts and the effectiveness of Allied procedures for exploiting captured intelligence under combat conditions. The psychological warfare implications of successful capture operations extended beyond immediate tactical benefits to influence German strategic thinking about the effectiveness of special operations and deception techniques against Allied forces. The systematic exposure of Operation Greif demonstrated Allied counterintelligence capabilities while undermining German confidence in their ability to achieve strategic surprise through unconventional warfare methods. The propaganda value of capturing and exposing German infiltrators provided Allied forces with evidence of enemy desperation while demonstrating the effectiveness of American military security procedures under combat conditions. The systematic documentation of captured German infiltrators and their equipment provided valuable intelligence about enemy manufacturing capabilities, training procedures, and operational doctrine that would influence Allied understanding of German special operations throughout the remainder of the war. The detailed analysis of German deception techniques revealed both the sophistication of enemy preparation and the limitations of infiltration operations against alert and well-trained security forces. The lessons learned from Operation Greif would influence Allied counterintelligence doctrine and training programs that would prove valuable in subsequent conflicts, where deception and infiltration remained important components of enemy strategy. The psychological transformation of Allied forces following the exposure of Operation Greif created a security consciousness that fundamentally altered daily military operations throughout the European theater, as soldiers who had previously operated with relative trust and informal procedures suddenly found themselves subject to systematic identity verification and security screening that affected every aspect of military life. The heightened security measures that were implemented in response to infiltration threats required enormous investments in personnel and time, as military police units were expanded and repositioned to conduct systematic screening operations at checkpoints, command posts, and logistics facilities throughout Allied-controlled territory. The operational impact of these security measures was significant, slowing movement and communications while requiring resources that might otherwise have been available for combat operations against conventional German forces. The counterintelligence revolution that emerged from Operation Greif exposure influenced Allied security doctrine and training programs that would remain relevant throughout the Cold War period and beyond, as military leaders recognized the need for systematic procedures to detect and counter infiltration operations that exploited cultural familiarity and language skills to penetrate military organizations. The development of improved interrogation techniques, identity verification procedures, and security awareness training reflected lessons learned from German infiltration attempts while establishing institutional capabilities that would prove valuable for addressing similar threats in subsequent conflicts. The systematic approach to counterintelligence that emerged from Operation Greif represented a permanent enhancement to Allied military capabilities that exceeded the immediate tactical value of thwarting German deception operations. The legal precedents established through military trials and executions of captured German infiltrators influenced international law and military justice procedures that would govern the treatment of spies, saboteurs, and unlawful combatants throughout the remainder of World War II and in subsequent conflicts. The systematic documentation of legal proceedings against German agents operating in Allied uniforms provided evidence of Allied adherence to international law while establishing precedents for dealing with similar violations in future operations. The integration of legal procedures with operational security requirements demonstrated Allied capacity for maintaining legal standards under combat conditions while addressing immediate security threats through appropriate judicial measures. The intelligence windfall that resulted from systematic capture and interrogation of German infiltrators provided Allied commanders with unprecedented insights into German special operations capabilities, training methods, and strategic thinking that influenced tactical and operational planning throughout the remainder of the European campaign. The detailed information obtained about German infiltration techniques, equipment, and procedures enabled Allied forces to develop comprehensive countermeasures while providing strategic intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions that proved valuable for understanding German military thinking and resource allocation decisions. The systematic exploitation of captured intelligence demonstrated Allied institutional capabilities for transforming tactical successes into strategic advantages through comprehensive analysis and dissemination of information. The propaganda and psychological warfare implications of exposing Operation Greif provided Allied forces with powerful evidence of German desperation and strategic confusion that could be exploited to undermine enemy morale while strengthening Allied confidence in their military and intelligence capabilities. The systematic documentation and publicization of German infiltration attempts demonstrated enemy willingness to violate international law, while highlighting Allied effectiveness in detecting and countering unconventional threats. The strategic communication value of these exposures exceeded their immediate tactical importance by providing evidence that German leadership was resorting to increasingly desperate measures that violated established military conventions and international law. The operational security enhancements that were implemented throughout Allied forces following Operation Greif exposure created systematic improvements in military procedures that reduced vulnerability to future infiltration attempts while establishing institutional capabilities for detecting and countering deception operations. The development of improved password systems, identity verification procedures, and security awareness training provided Allied forces with enhanced protection against infiltration while creating cultural awareness that would prove valuable for identifying enemy agents attempting to exploit cultural familiarity for military advantage. The systematic approach to security enhancement demonstrated Allied institutional capacity for learning from enemy actions and implementing comprehensive countermeasures that exceeded immediate tactical requirements. The impact on German special operations capabilities extended beyond the immediate failure of Operation Greif to influence strategic thinking about the effectiveness of unconventional warfare against alert and well-prepared enemy forces. The systematic exposure of German infiltration operations demonstrated Allied counterintelligence capabilities while undermining German confidence in their ability to achieve strategic surprise through deception and infiltration techniques. The strategic implications of these failures influenced German resource allocation decisions and operational planning throughout the remainder of the war, as commanders recognized that unconventional operations were unlikely to achieve decisive results against opponents who possessed effective counterintelligence capabilities. The training and doctrine modifications that resulted from Operation Greif analysis influenced American military education and professional development programs that would prove relevant throughout the Cold War period and beyond, as military leaders recognized the need for systematic preparation to address unconventional threats that exploited cultural familiarity and language skills to penetrate military organizations. The integration of counterintelligence awareness into basic military training and professional education provided American forces with enhanced capabilities for detecting and countering infiltration operations, while creating institutional knowledge that would prove valuable in subsequent conflicts where deception and cultural exploitation remained important components of enemy strategy. The alliance coordination improvements that emerged from Operation Greif response demonstrated enhanced Allied capabilities for sharing intelligence and coordinating security measures across national boundaries and organizational structures that had previously operated with limited integration. The systematic coordination of counterintelligence operations between American, British, and other Allied forces provided evidence of institutional maturation that would prove valuable for subsequent operations requiring multinational cooperation and intelligence sharing. The development of standardized procedures for handling captured infiltrators and exploiting intelligence obtained from deception operations established precedents for alliance cooperation that would influence NATO doctrine and procedures throughout the post-war period. The strategic assessment implications of Operation Greif failure influenced Allied understanding of German military capabilities and strategic thinking that provided valuable insights into enemy decision-making processes and resource allocation priorities during the final phases of the European war. The systematic analysis of German willingness to violate international law through infiltration operations provided evidence of strategic desperation, while revealing institutional capabilities and limitations that influenced Allied planning for subsequent operations. The intelligence value of understanding German special operations doctrine and capabilities exceeded the immediate tactical importance of thwarting infiltration attempts by providing strategic insights that influenced Allied assessment of enemy intentions and capabilities throughout the remainder of the conflict. The technological and procedural innovations that resulted from Operation Greif countermeasures influenced military communications, identification systems, and security procedures that would prove relevant for addressing similar threats throughout the Cold War period and beyond. The development of improved radio security procedures, document verification systems, and personnel identification methods provided Allied forces with enhanced protection against infiltration while establishing technological capabilities that would prove valuable for subsequent conflicts involving sophisticated enemies with advanced deception capabilities. The systematic approach to technological countermeasures demonstrated Allied institutional capacity for developing comprehensive solutions to unconventional threats through coordinated military, industrial, and scientific efforts. The systematic analysis of German infiltration techniques revealed sophisticated approaches to cultural deception and linguistic preparation that represented significant advances in special operations methodology, demonstrating enemy capabilities for detailed cultural analysis and personnel training that exceeded previous intelligence estimates of German special operations sophistication. The comprehensive preparation that German infiltrators had received in American military culture, slang, current events, and behavioral patterns reflected systematic intelligence gathering and training programs that demonstrated institutional capabilities for cultural warfare that had not been anticipated by Allied planners. The detailed understanding of these techniques provided Allied counterintelligence specialists with valuable insights into enemy methods while establishing analytical frameworks for detecting similar operations in future conflicts. The counterintelligence innovations that emerged from Operation Greif response established new approaches to identity verification, cultural testing, and behavioral analysis that would influence American military and civilian security procedures throughout the Cold War period and beyond. The development of systematic interrogation techniques that could detect cultural inconsistencies, linguistic anomalies, and behavioral patterns associated with foreign training provided Allied forces with enhanced capabilities for identifying enemy agents while establishing methodological foundations that would prove valuable for addressing similar threats in subsequent conflicts. The integration of psychological analysis with traditional counterintelligence methods represented significant advances in security science that exceeded immediate tactical requirements. The legal and procedural frameworks that were developed for handling captured infiltrators established precedents for dealing with unlawful combatants and spies that would influence international law and military justice procedures throughout the post-war period. The systematic documentation of legal proceedings against German agents operating in Allied uniforms provided evidence of Allied adherence to international law while establishing judicial procedures for addressing violations of military conventions under combat conditions. The integration of legal requirements with operational security necessities demonstrated institutional capabilities for maintaining legal standards while addressing immediate security threats through appropriate judicial measures. The communications security enhancements that resulted from Operation Greif analysis led to systematic improvements in radio procedures, password systems, and information-sharing protocols that provided Allied forces with enhanced protection against infiltration while establishing security procedures that would prove relevant throughout the Cold War period. The development of improved authentication methods, secure communication procedures, and compartmentalized information systems reflected lessons learned from German infiltration attempts while establishing technological capabilities that would prove valuable for subsequent conflicts involving sophisticated enemies with advanced intelligence capabilities. The systematic approach to communication security demonstrated Allied institutional capacity for developing comprehensive solutions to unconventional threats. The intelligence analysis methodologies that were refined through Operation Greif investigation established new approaches to pattern recognition, behavioral analysis, and cultural assessment that would influence American intelligence operations throughout the post-war period and beyond. The systematic study of German deception techniques provided analytical frameworks for understanding enemy cultural warfare capabilities, while establishing methodological foundations for detecting similar operations in future conflicts. The integration of cultural analysis with traditional intelligence methods represented significant advances in intelligence science that exceeded immediate tactical requirements while providing institutional capabilities that would prove valuable for addressing sophisticated threats in the nuclear age. The training and education innovations that resulted from Operation Greif lessons influenced American military professional development programs that emphasized cultural awareness, security consciousness, and counterintelligence principles as essential components of modern military competence. The integration of counterintelligence training into basic military education and advanced professional courses provided American forces with enhanced capabilities for detecting and countering infiltration operations, while creating institutional knowledge that would prove valuable in subsequent conflicts, where cultural deception remained an important component of enemy strategy. The systematic approach to education and training demonstrated Allied institutional capacity for learning from enemy actions and implementing comprehensive countermeasures. The international cooperation frameworks that were established for sharing intelligence about infiltration operations and coordinating counterintelligence efforts provided Allied forces with enhanced capabilities for addressing transnational security threats that exceeded the capabilities of individual national organizations. The systematic coordination of security measures between American, British, and other Allied forces demonstrated institutional maturation that would prove valuable for subsequent operations, requiring multinational cooperation and intelligence sharing. The development of standardized procedures for handling captured infiltrators and exploiting intelligence obtained from deception operations established precedents for alliance cooperation that would influence NATO doctrine and procedures throughout the Cold War period. The technological countermeasures that were developed in response to German infiltration techniques included improved identification systems, document verification procedures, and communication security methods that would prove relevant for addressing similar threats throughout the post-war period. The systematic development of technological solutions to infiltration threats demonstrated Allied industrial and scientific capabilities for addressing unconventional warfare challenges while establishing technological foundations that would prove valuable for subsequent conflicts involving sophisticated enemies with advanced deception capabilities. The integration of technological innovation with operational requirements reflected comprehensive approaches to security that exceeded immediate tactical necessities. The strategic doctrine implications of Operation Greif analysis influenced American military thinking about unconventional warfare, cultural deception, and intelligence operations that would prove relevant throughout the Cold War period and beyond. The systematic evaluation of German special operations capabilities provided strategic insights into enemy thinking while establishing analytical frameworks for understanding unconventional threats that might be encountered in future conflicts. The integration of lessons learned from Operation Greif into American strategic doctrine demonstrated institutional capacity for systematic learning and adaptation that would prove valuable for addressing sophisticated threats throughout the nuclear age and beyond. The profound irony of Operation Greif lay in its transformation from a sophisticated deception operation designed to create chaos and confusion into a catalyst for Allied unity and security consciousness that ultimately strengthened rather than weakened American military capabilities. Skorzeny's carefully planned infiltration operation, which represented months of preparation and systematic analysis of American military culture, achieved the opposite of its intended effects by exposing German desperation while demonstrating Allied institutional capabilities for detecting and countering unconventional threats through systematic counterintelligence procedures. The capture and execution of German infiltrators became symbols of Allied effectiveness rather than evidence of German operational sophistication, transforming what should have been a strategic advantage into a propaganda defeat that undermined enemy credibility. The human dimension of Operation Greif's failure reflected broader truths about the relationship between deception and trust in military organizations, as the systematic exposure of German infiltrators ultimately reinforced Allied confidence in their security procedures, while creating cultural awareness that would prove valuable throughout the remainder of the war. The German personnel who had volunteered for these dangerous missions demonstrated individual courage and professional competence, but their sacrifice achieved strategic results that contradicted German objectives by providing Allied forces with intelligence and experience that enhanced rather than degraded American military capabilities. The transformation of German infiltrators from threats into sources of intelligence represented the systematic failure of deception operations against alert and well-prepared opponents. The strategic implications of Operation Greif's collapse extended beyond immediate tactical consequences to influence German strategic thinking about unconventional warfare and the effectiveness of deception operations against technologically sophisticated and institutionally mature opponents. The systematic exposure of infiltration operations demonstrated Allied counterintelligence capabilities while revealing German limitations in understanding democratic military culture and organizational resilience that enabled effective responses to unconventional threats. The failure of cultural deception against opponents who possess systematic procedures for identity verification and security screening provided strategic lessons about the limitations of infiltration operations that would influence military thinking throughout the post-war period. The legacy of Operation Greif continues to influence contemporary understanding of deception warfare, cultural infiltration, and the institutional responses necessary for addressing unconventional threats that exploit cultural familiarity and linguistic capabilities to penetrate military and civilian organizations. The systematic failure of German infiltration operations demonstrated that sophisticated deception requires not only technical competence, but also deep understanding of target cultures and institutional procedures that cannot be acquired through superficial training or preparation. The operation's collapse proved that in modern warfare, institutional resilience and systematic security procedures often prove more effective than individual courage or operational sophistication in determining the outcomes of unconventional conflicts, where deception and trust become decisive factors in military effectiveness. If you want more untold stories of World War II, subscribe now to www.2 Secret Archives, where history's darkest secrets are revealed.